In this lesson, we will try to determine the sign, positive, negative, or zero, of a quadratic without evaluating it. We will do so by finding the sign of each factor separately and then combining the signs by multiplying them. Every quadratic, ax squared plus bx plus c, factors as a times x minus z1, x minus z2 for z1 and z2, the zeros of the quadratic. Then we see that the quadratic is equal to 0 when x is equal to z1 or x is equal to z2. Equal to 0 and equal to 0. But then, for all other numbers, the quadratic will either be positive or negative. And such numbers are in the following three intervals: negative infinity, comma, z1, z1, comma, z2, or z2, comma, infinity. From the factors, the constant a is always either positive or negative. So it will either be positive everywhere or it will be negative everywhere. And then each linear factor, x minus z, will be 0 when x is equal to z. For example, if this was z1, this factor will be 0 exactly when x is equal to z1, but then the factor will be positive when x is greater than z, which is the area to the right of its 0 or to the interval z comma infinity, and it would be negative to the left of the 0 when x is less than z. Same for the other factor, x minus z2. This factor would be 0 when x is equal to z2. It will be positive when x is greater than z2, but negative when x is less than z2. In each interval now, the sign of the quadratic is determined by multiplying the signs of the factors. Negative, negative, and let's say negative. When we multiply those three, we would get a negative sign. Negative, positive, and again negative if our leading term was negative. The answer here would be positive. Negative, positive, and positive in this interval. The answer here would be negative. For example, given the quadratic 2x squared minus 10x minus 12, we want to factor it. So we will factor out the 2, we will get x squared minus 5x minus 6, and now the factorization is 2x plus 1 x minus 6. The zeros of the quadratic are negative 1 and positive 6. The intervals created on the number line will be negative infinity to negative 1, negative 1 to 6, and 6 to infinity. To determine the sign of each factor, first we will do the leading term. So 2 is positive in all intervals. The factor x minus 1, x plus 1, is 0 when x is equal to negative 1, and then it's positive when x is greater than negative 1 in the intervals negative 1 comma 6 and 6 to infinity, and negative when x is less than negative 1 in the interval negative infinity to negative 1. The factor x minus 6 is 0 when x is equal to 6, and then it is positive when x is greater than 6 in the interval x comma infinity, and negative when x is less than 6. This is to the left of 6, the intervals negative infinity to negative 1 and negative 1 to 6. The quadratic, which is 2 times x plus 1 x minus 6, will be positive or negative determined by multiplying the signs of the three factors. In the interval negative infinity to negative 1, the quadratic is positive times a negative times a negative. That makes it positive. In the interval negative 1 to 6, it is positive times negative. That will make it a negative. And in the interval from 6 to infinity, it will be a positive times a positive times a positive, which will make it a positive. Overall, the quadratic is equal to 0 when x is equal to negative 1 or x equal to 6. The quadratic is positive in the intervals negative infinity to negative 1 and the interval 6 to infinity. And we write that x is in the intervals negative infinity to negative 1 union 6 to infinity. This is the symbol u that is read as a union, and it is negative in the interval negative 1 comma 6.